In this video, I'm going to go over light artillery. Now, light artillery, at least to me, is up to 105 millimeter in Western countries. And if you're talking former comm bloc, like Russia, Warsaw Pact, China, and the satellite countries, it's up to 122 millimeter. Now I'm going to cover weapon systems that are currently being found on the battlefields in places like Ukraine and Syria, weapons that could potentially be used here in the US, and that's the reason why I got the first one listed on there, is Civil War area 1860s. So these are your black powder cannons. There are a lot of them out there, and they are a weapon system that I could potentially see being used. Now, I'm sure we'd have to make more modern versions of the shells, but they did have fused and also timed shells for cannons during the Civil War. Now, for the Union Army, it was typically a crew of 8 on the gun, and then 4 additional troops that would handle the horses. So on the gun, you had the gunner, cannoneers 1 through 4, an ammunition bearer who was listed as cannoneer 5 if you look up the doctrine on the stuff, and then cannoneers 6 through 7 did ammunition prep and they cut the fuses. In the Union Army, there were typically 6 guns to a battery, 5 batteries to an artillery brigade to a division. Now in the Confederate Army, because they had far less equipment, they would typically have in a battery around 4 guns, and that depended where it was. If it was in the west of the Mississippi, it was 3 guns. East of the Mississippi, it was 4 guns. They were organized in a battalion, but that really depended on the theater they were in. With the Union Army, they were all the same caliber. In the Confederate Army, it's whatever they were able to capture. So you could have multiple calibers inside the battery. Now next we'll have weapons that are all over the U.S. You'll see these as monuments in front of VFWs and legions, outside of military posts, at military museums and that stuff. And there are still some inside arsenals, which are maintained for either sending to other countries or for use by the military for one reason or another. The old 105 millimeters, so we're going World War II, like the M2 series, up to Vietnam, the M101s, M102s. There was a crew of 8, which consisted of a gunner, an assistant gunner, cannoneers 1 through 5, and a driver who was responsible for the truck, which was typically a 2.5-ton truck, for pulling the cannon. They were organized 4 guns to a battery, 3 batteries to a battalion, and somewhat 1 battalion to an infantry regiment or brigade. I'm sure there were differences on that depending on the type of division, just like there is now. Now we'll move on to World War II Russia. The M30, which is a 122 millimeter. I've seen a lot of pictures of these in Syria, and a few of them appearing inside the Ukraine. So they're still out there, still being used. You know, they're 70-some years old, and they're still out there in the battlefield. They had a crew of 8. I could not find a breakdown for the duty positions. Typically organized 3 to 4 guns to a battalion, and each division had roughly 16 guns, and that's for an infantry division. They also had artillery divisions, which were just artillery weapons. Now, they retired the M30 and replaced it during the Cold War with the D30. The D30 was a 122 millimeter gun, crew of 7, and I could not find a breakdown as to duty positions. 4 to 6 guns to a battery, 3 batteries per artillery battalion or artillery group. Now, the D30 is still in use in the Russian Army. They are retiring it. They're retiring it and replacing it with a wheeled self-propelled version. The current organization I could find for the Russian Army on them is there are 18 guns, 122 millimeters D30s in a battalion, and 1 to 2 battalions per infantry regiment or infantry brigade. They are reorganizing the Russian Army right now off of lessons learned since the end of the Cold War, especially from watching us in Iraq, in Somalia, and in Afghanistan, and also NATO exercises. Now, the last one here is current. Okay, the current issue is in the U.S. Army is the M119 series. It is a 105 millimeter gun, a crew of 7. You have the section chief, the gunner, the ammunition team chief, the assistant gunner, the driver, and 2 cannoneers. There is 6 guns organized or split between 2 platoons per battery. There are 2 105 millimeter batteries and 1 155 millimeter battery per battalion in light infantry brigades. Now, a note on that, if it is a striker brigade, it is only 155 millimeters, so the M777, the M777 series. Now, some other information on the U.S. organization, since that would be the one most likely we would come across. Up at the headquarters level, there is a target acquisition headquarters platoon team, which would be in charge of the scouts and observers, is my guess. And I came across a note that that is not in every infantry brigade. It depends on the type of brigade. There is a weapons locating radar section, a meteorological team, 2 survey teams, 1 counter fire operations section, so 1 counter battery section that concentrates on finding enemy batteries, 1 or more fire support platoons, and 1 lightweight counter-mortar radar section. There is also a service battery that would be roughly up at the headquarters level, but it is its own separate unit. Their job would be maintenance of the equipment in the battalion. Inside the batteries, as I said, you have 2 platoons. Inside each platoon, you have its own fire direction center, or FDC. And in that FDC, you had a fire directions officer, which would be the platoon leader, chief fire direction computer, which would be the senior NCO, the platoon sergeant. He's the technical expert. His job is to supervise computation of all data and ensures all records are maintained. There is a fire direction computer, basically a person whose job it is to find out the firing data for issuing out to the individual guns. There are 2 fire direction specialists, one referred to as a horizontal control operator, who constructs and maintains the primary firing chart and determines and announces the chart data, and a vertical control operator who constructs the secondary firing charts, checks the chart data, plots initial target location on the situation map and determines and announces the locations on the map. And then either a separate soldier for this duty, or be one that would be done by the HCO or VCO, and that would be the RTO, the radio telephone operator or driver for that section. Now, I did come across that up at the battery headquarters, they have what's referred to as a battery operations center. They're responsible for the command logistics for that entire battery. They have one ammunition section per platoon inside that battery, which is assigned to the headquarters. And they act as the alternate fire direction center for each platoon if something were to happen. Now, for the firing procedure, basically what I found out, the call for fire comes in to the battalion, typically. The battalion sends the order down to the battery then sends the order down to the platoon then figures the firing data, sends it out to the guns get laid onto position, and they fire in the firing mission until rounds complete. If the battalion fire direction center up there, their version of it, is not operational or it's too far away, then the battery assumes those duties, the battery operations center. So then they would receive the call for fire and they would send it down to the platoon. It's very rare I came across where the platoon FDC, the fire direction center, will get the orders from a forward observer directly and then sends out the fire mission. It's supposed to go through either battalion or battery level. Now, light artillery, I think, is about the extent militia should go to, especially post-conflict. During conflict, hey, if we capture 155 millimeter, 152 millimeters, 130s, 203 millimeters, 175s, whatever, we'll use it. But light artillery fits more into a militia type organization, which is supposed to be light and fast, to operate primarily as a guerrilla force. I do recommend that if you do capture artillery, try to mount it on a vehicle. I will try to post a link to it. There is a artillery self-propelled gun produced in the Republic of Korea that is essentially a 5-ton truck, a US designed 5-ton truck, and on its back is a 105 millimeter howitzer, like the M101, M102. That truck drives into position, it spreads out and drops some landing legs to elevate it up off the ground, creating a firing platform, and then they fire the rounds from the gun, and then they retract the legs, pull them in, and then they move on to their next firing position. That's self-propelled artillery right there, something that definitely could be used in a militia. Notes that I thought of on the Civil War style cannons, if we come across those, they primarily would probably be a direct fire weapon. Think of it as urban warfare. We're going to engage a combat outpost inside a city. Well, we bring the gun up, we have it down an alley or down a corner of the street, it gets loaded there. On order, as soon as the order comes in, the gun gets wheeled out onto the street, aimed onto the enemy outpost. They fire the cannon, pick it up, pull it back around the corner, and reload it. And then as soon as they're reloaded, and the enemy fire is slacked down enough, they pop it back out around the corner again, and they fire a round back into the enemy's fortifications again. And they keep going until the gun's destroyed, or they've made the hole in the wall that they were needed for. So, look some of the information up. I just gave you the more common stuff that I've seen in videos. you look at the videos for Syria, you're going to see a lot of really old equipment in there. I've seen them using old, what are most likely World War II era US 105 millimeters, along with World War II era M30s, the 122 millimeters from Russia. So this stuff is still out there. It's still being used. It's still a viable option. Yes, it's obsolete because there's better stuff out there, but hey, if it's what you got, it's what you got. Now for all my engineer brothers and the Patriot and Militia movements, always remember, essayons.